exegesis, or his exegesis of the passage, which is to go and dig out what's there and bring it to the surface, that all those things are in there. But he likes to speculate a little bit about what was going on behind the scenes. And so you have to be careful to balance it. If you took that he was saying it from the passage, it actually would be the eisegesis to read something in. But I don't think he's trying to do that. He's just trying to speculate of all of the emotional factors and things that might be involved. Was Lot mad at Abram for this whole scene in Egypt? Now he was the bad guy there too, and everybody looked at Abram and what he had done, and Lot was connected with all that? Well, we don't know. We could assume that there might have been some kind of reaction or emotion about the whole thing, but the reality is, without reading anything into the passage, they're coming out of Egypt, Lot is with them, and now Abram was very rich because while he was in Egypt, remember, it was looking good. By sight, he was making some money and getting some power and influence and resources, and so now he's very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. Now, when you get to verse 3, he's on his journey through the Negev, and he gets to Bethel, house of God. And so here he's at this place. His tent has been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. Ai is going to come back up again as being important as well as Bethel much later. But when the people come into the land of promise, the nation of Israel, after their captivity time, that's one of the first battles that they faced that doesn't go well. Ai. We wanted to think about this passage a little bit, and I began to realize that there are some things that are going on here. Verse 4, to the place of the altar where he had made formerly, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. I can see that's a little hard to see there. Sorry, but on the name of the Lord. Is he now coming out of Egypt in a better place spiritually, seeking God, going back to that place where he met the Lord? And I think that we can see that from the text. We don't have to read that in there anyway. This is a person who, walking with the Lord, making some bad choices along the way as we do. What does he do when he's dealt with now the consequence that the choices that he made? Did he turn away from God? No. He went right back to the place where by faith he had received what God had promised. He went back to that place and met with God to know and to have that sense of connectedness again. Well, as you think about the fact that he's blown his witness with the pagans in Egypt and he's destroyed this relationship with Pharaoh, those bridges are burned. What are you going to do? Well, by sight, it looks terrible. But by faith, you know that God doesn't give up on those that belong to him. And so rather than looking back and wishing that everything could be different or feeling ashamed or feeling guilty, now it is time to say, okay, I'm going to look forward to what God would have me do today and the days ahead. And so he gets back to the land of promise. He gets back to the altar. And he is now, as you see it there in the passage, Abram called on the name of the Lord. I want to ask you a question today. How many of us come to a place in the day where we stop and we call on the name of the Lord? Where we acknowledge that this day is his day. Where the choices to be made are going to be the best choices made in his will, by his direction. You see, this is the kind of relationship God wants to have. This is the kind of fellowship that he wants to have with us. Not that we just bump into God from time to time, but that we live our life walking with God day by day. And so in this whole issue with Abram and the nation is going to follow, I mean, you think about it. Here is Abram going to Egypt because of famine. And ultimately, many, many years later, that's how the nation of Israel is going to be back in Egypt. There's going to be a famine, and they're going to go there to be taken care of. They come out of Egypt, 400 years later, after having problems with Pharaoh that Moses delivered, and God did. They go through the land of the desert to the land of promise. It's almost like it's a family thing for them to go and have these problems and crash into things with Egypt. And yet, as Egypt often points to the world, to paganism, to heathenism, to materialism and all those kinds of things, God still uses Egypt for his purposes. Do we understand that? When Jesus was going to be killed as a toddler, where did God send him? To Egypt. Joseph took him to Egypt. And so all of these things God can use. We don't need to say that because something is a material thing, like the Greeks maybe did, that it's automatically bad. Wealth, resources, all of those things God can use, but are they placed into his hand, or are they simply something we desire and we pursue on our own? And in verse 5, here we get into the situation. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. He doesn't mention a lot of silver and gold there, but yeah. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great, and they were not able to remain together. Now this, as we take this passage for what it says and the face value, no matter what we might read into the passage about emotional concerns or problems or that sort of thing, the scripture clearly says they both have so much stuff they can't stay together in one place and feed all the animals and water all the animals and all that. It just won't work. Now, Morris talks about in that book that there's a point in time where you get into a situation like this, and as we'll look at in a moment in verse 7, where it's important for people to go their own way. I would be cautious with that if you have that book, because sometimes we make it far too easy for people to go their own way. As a Southern Baptist, I have witnessed throughout my lifetime people who have never resolved issues, they've never talked them over, they've never gone to the Lord like Matthew 18 calls us to, and dealt with issues. They just left. And this is just not the heart of, as Jesus was saying, that we should love one another. As I have loved you, love one another. There may be times when there's a need for ministries to go a different way, or for resources that are being demanded too much in one place to be spread around. But be careful with that idea is the resolution to everything in Genesis 13:7. And there was strife. And that's where it always comes to at some point. There's a need, a greater need that can be met. It happened in the church in Jerusalem early on when the widows of the Greek Jews were saying they weren't getting the same kind of food resources as the Jewish widows from the area. And so there's a struggle over resources. And there was strife there as well. There's strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. So now these employees, if you please, are fighting in the trenches over the water and the food, the resources that are there. Now we get a little insert here. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzites were dwelling then in the land. So we're just given this marker. Here's where we are. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Now, this is brothers in the sense of in fellowship with each other, even though Abram is uncle, Lot is nephew. And yet there's that kinsman relationship that is a part of that. And so you see the heart of Abram. The heart of Abram is we cannot let our circumstances that we see become the controlling factor in what we do. You see that? I mean, we're going to make a choice here, And we can go by the sight of things, or we can pursue what it is that God would have us do. So, yes, we don't need to ignore the strife. We don't need to avoid the struggle that's going on between the herdsmen here. But we have to make sure that we protect the fellowship of the brethren. And so in verse 9, Abram throws out this idea. Is not the whole land before you? Now remember, God has given the land to Abram. He's given it to him. And so Lot really doesn't have, except for his physical relationship with his uncle, he doesn't have any promise from God that the land is going to be his. It belongs to Abram and to Abram's descendants. And so Abram is, doing to others, I guess, as you'd have him doing to you, what Jesus said, is not the whole land before you. Please separate from me, if to the left, and I will go to the right. If to the right, I will go to the left. Now this is absolutely self-sacrificing on the part of Abram. And sometimes if we're going to walk and we're going to live by faith, we have to come to the place where we're willing to look far enough ahead to know that if I do what is pleasing in God's sight, that God is going to provide for me either way. And so by faith, he's able to say to Lot, you choose, you pick. Let's just stay in our fellowship together. Well, in verse 10, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan. Now, folks, when you say you saw the valley of the Jordan, of course, they were on some kind of a mountaintop here, and they look out. This is not like, looking a few hundred yards. The valley of the Jordan is the length of the nation of Israel. When you go from the Sea of Galilee, and you come down the Jordan River all the way through the Dead Sea and down, you're talking about at that time, the Dead Sea wasn't dead. And you're talking about the fact that we're going to see in a moment that Lot talks about the cities that are still there, that are no longer there, that have been destroyed. And so he looks at this whole area, and so he sees that it is well watered everywhere. He looks at it and he thinks of it like the garden of the Lord. He thinks of it like the Garden of Eden. Now, he's not been in it per se, in the sense of in its perfection, but certainly as it's been handed down, either orally or in written form, through the different family members of what happened in the Word of God in that time, in the Garden of Eden, and how perfect it all was. It was in his mind and his thinking, it's like that. But then he says, it kind of reminds me of back when I was in Egypt. Now, how many things as Christians do we then select based on the fact that it reminds us of something back in Egypt, rather than something that we're going to seek God on, that life that we lived before we came to faith in Christ, and it meant something to us, or we saw it and it was nice, and we're still living in that kind of framework, when in fact, Lot could have said to Abram, they could have said to each other, we need to pray and ask God, what do we do in this situation? Now here are two people that believe in God and have been following his direction. And so here we're going to make a choice. He's making the choice by seeing how nice the land was. And we have this identifying factor that Sodom and Gomorrah are still there. In verse 11, so Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan. How much of it? Are we feeling a little greedy today? He chose the whole thing. And he journeys eastward, and they separated from each other. Now, he didn't need the whole thing to take care. I don't care how many sheep and camels and goats and whatever he had. He didn't need the whole thing. And so often we find ourselves in this lifetime also being tempted toward greed, toward excess, toward having just to have. And so as we are trying to walk with the Lord, it's important for us to choose God and His direction and His way in those choices, first of all. Verse 12. Now Abram has, quote unquote, what's left. He settled in the land of Canaan. Well, that was really what God had promised in that sense, was it not? And while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom, you see a problem here. Now, we're going to be very careful not to automatically judge Lot in this. Now, we're going to look at a passage in 2 Peter to help us understand this. But let's just say that verse 13, the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. And somehow or another, when he was looking at all the green and all the grass and all the places for his animals and his family and his servants and that sort of thing, that was different than what we're choosing now. What we're choosing now is to get back into town. And not just any town, but close to a town where it's exceedingly wicked and people are sinning against God. As we think about that in our own choices, we have to be careful how close we put ourselves to the rapid decline in wickedness. And I'm not talking about hiding somewhere from it. But I'm talking about there's a difference between moving into somebody's backyard to be close to it, but I'm not going to participate, but I'm going to be close to it. You see what I'm saying? And dealing with the fact that you have to go to work, you have to go to the store, you have to go to these places, and can you choose where to live? Well, if you take that to God by faith and you ask Him to direct you, He